Welcome to the Shift Report, the podcast from MCentric and the MCentric Foundation. MCentric is the go-to information and resources hub designed exclusively for the emergency medicine community. We regularly host key leaders from the field who share their insights and experience. Our goal is to inform our listeners and to encourage you to use what you learn to improve your practice and improve yourself. To learn more, please visit us at mcentric.org. Today's episode is sponsored by Lotus Clinician Wellbeing. Lotus Clinician Wellbeing provides consulting services designed to prioritize clinician wellness in order to provide the best care for their patients. Lotus Clinician Wellbeing supports healthcare professionals with personalized coaching and consulting services for groups and individuals in areas such as career development, leadership, burnout prevention, practice management, and more. For more information, visit lotusclinicianwellbeing.com. Today, we welcome Ian Warrington. Dr. Warrington lives and works in the Washington, D.C. area, and he has a fascinating story to tell. This is a bit of a change from our standard podcast, but we really welcome him and found him in an unusual way, which I'll talk about. He's working shifts like the rest of us, like most emergency physicians, but he's also an accomplished musician and will tell us a bit about his music and how it helps him and how perhaps it can help you as you get through the stresses of your professional and your personal lives. Welcome, Ian.
Thanks. Yeah, happy to talk.
Great. This is a real joy to have you with us today. And I'll have to be honest with the audience, some of whom maybe don't listen to the same podcast that you and I listen to. But we found you through a podcast, which is funny, particularly for those of us of a certain age, and particularly from the Washington, D.C. area, the Tony Kornheiser Show. And brief story, Tony's a former Washington Post sports writer, has been over 20 years on ESPN, and has his own podcast, which is quite funny and which I enjoy greatly. During the show, there's a song toward the end of the show that introduces his what he calls his mailbag, where people email in things that he reads. And he's got an intro song that started as a classic version, and then people started sending in versions of it that he plays that include, among others, the University of Missouri Marching Band, Darius Rucker, and yet another famous musician, Ian Warrington. And he introduces you as a musician and emergency physician in a fairly funny way and predictable way. So I found you that way, and you graciously agreed to join us. So we'll talk about that as we go through. But it's a claim to fame, and I sort of very much recommend the podcast. And sometimes you'll hear Ian on it. But tell us about your journey to emergency medicine first, and then we'll talk a bit about your music.
Sure. Yeah. So I mean, the journey to emergency medicine was, I don't think it's that interesting. I mean, I took a couple of years off after undergrad, sort of thinking that I wanted to go to medical school, but just needing a little time to be sure. And I think I gravitated towards emergency medicine pretty quickly. I think like a lot of people, I was interested by all the different rotations, but there was no one in particular that grabbed me. So I kind of liked a little bit of everything, and I liked doing procedures. And yeah, so I think by the time I was halfway through third year of med school, I was pretty sold on emergency medicine. Finished residency in 2012. Actually was a residency. Leon Edelman was a year ahead of me. He was a guest of yours recently. And so, yeah, the music thing that has sort of been a bit of a kind of getting back to it. So I was a pretty serious musician. I mean, I started playing the violin when I was 6, and I was thinking about going to conservatory for a while in high school. And I played pretty seriously all the way through college. I mean, I wasn't technically a music major, but in essence, I kind of was. My senior project was working on a violin concerto and playing with the symphony. So I was pretty serious about it. And then I just sort of, in hindsight, kind of regret letting go of it. But I really stopped playing much at all for about 10 years. Residency started, and it was partly being too busy and partly living in an apartment with thin walls and not wanting to bother my neighbors. But I mean, I just didn't play other than just like for the occasional family or friend's wedding for over a decade. And then my way back in was during COVID, sort of during that initial lockdown when everybody was isolated and, depressed and having a tough time. One thing that really resonated with me was, there were a lot of people on social media sharing music. Yo-Yo Ma in particular. I just really remember this very vividly because he was sort of a hero of mine as a kid. Um, just sharing I think he called it living room concert or something like that. Just him playing the one of the Bach cello suites in his living room, sort of as a just a way to try to cheer people up and make a little bit of a connection. And I just really, he's always inspired me, and I just sort of figured, well, I have no illusions about being on Yo-Yo Ma's level, but I can play, and it's a nice way to share music. So I started just doing that, just sharing things on Instagram, just because it's a platform that's easy. Um, and it was just kind of a fun way to sort of give myself an excuse to play and have a way to share stuff. And then as I got back into it, I just started playing more and started recording my own things for the first time. And I'm really mostly a violinist, but I sort of messed around with the guitar and the piano previously. But I've started doing more keyboard and guitar, and I got an electric bass last year. Um, and so honestly, it really was COVID was the impetus to get into it. And since then, I've sort of realized, it shouldn't take a once in a century disaster to make you focus on what, what makes you happy. And so since then, I've just sort of realized it's, why not just keep it going? It's a really great way to stay relaxed. And um, so I'm really happy I've gotten into it. And in hindsight, I wished I'd, kept it up a lot better during residency and earlier in my career.
And having heard some of your work, which you can find at ianwarringtonmusic.com, which we'll continue to promote, you're more than messing around.
Oh, thank you.
Much more than messing around. And I think those of us who are not musicians can watch you and hear you and realize that you have a gift with not just the violin, but other instruments, and then they were able to work them into music that really, I'm not even sure if there's a genre. Maybe there is that you have, but they're across multiple types of music.
Yeah, so it's sort of, well, I sort of, the stuff that I'm doing, I sort of break into two different categories. So that I've recorded several albums of music and, put up on Spotify and Apple Music. And that stuff I do, I wouldn't call that messing around because I work on that and I, you know, record it, I do multiple takes and I try to get the balance right. And so those I really, I take pride in those. The messing around thing I sort of refer to, the stuff I'll put up on Instagram is more casual. Like that's just sort of I'll just play it through, play multiple parts, but I'll just play it through once and I don't spend too much time obsessing about getting all the details right. But yeah, in terms of genre, I like to mess around in terms when I'm just playing for the fun of it. I like all, classical through folk stuff, through old-timey fiddle tunes, through Scotch Irish traditional stuff. The music that I've recorded and put on streaming services, that's more consistently sort of basically traditional Scottish, Irish, American fiddle music. I think a reference point that a lot of people get the Civil War film series by Ken Burns in the like
Mhm.
around 1990. The theme song for that, that's this fiddle tune called "Ashokan Farewell." That's just most people have heard it, even if they don't know it. That sort of was kind of the song that got me into that kind of music when I was 10 or 11 years old. And so it's that kind of like slow Scottish Irish traditional air slash slow waltz music. That's sort of the thing that I really gravitate to. So most of the
Uh,
recordings I've done have been in that vein.
yeah, and I think you're right. Those are tunes. I don't think you know the names of them. I don't think many of us know the names of them, but they're the sorts of music that you do recognize as I've heard that somewhere, even if you don't
Yeah.
remember that it's from the Civil War work that Ken Burns did or anybody else. But it's a type of music that is sometimes described as haunting, sometimes depending on what's being played, but is a very specific type and something I think you're right, people will recognize.
Yeah. And it's funny actually, just as that particular tune, Ashokan Farewell, which is, it's the piece that I have, been playing. It's been my favorite piece for 35 years. Most people just assume that it's a traditional Civil War era piece. But in fact, it was written in 1982. There's a guy named Jay Unger, who's just a very well-known fiddle player and composer, but he and his wife have this decades of really beautiful music in that vein. And so, in fact, the last album I did was just all songs of theirs. But that type of music is just gorgeous.
Yeah, it really is, and we will weave some of your music into this podcast and then play some of it afterwards for people to enjoy on their own after they hear me talking, and certainly can recommend going to your website and to your Instagram feed and hearing more of what you do. How does the music affect you professionally? We talked a little bit about being working shifts and the stress of shifts, and how do you use your music? Many of us have releases of all kinds, sports or reading or hobbies. What does the music do for you personally?
Um, I think, I mean, I think the biggest thing to me, I think, is just very I mean, I've never really done meditation per se, but it's just such an incredible way to sort of detach and just, yeah, just sort of separate myself from whatever I'm, you know, just sort of thinking about the stressful case I had last night, or, I think it's just an incredibly good way to, yeah, just relax and just kind of detach myself. And then there's also the part of it that it is really nice to have a way to share it. I don't have a particularly enormous platform, but it's nice to know that I can put something up and, typically at least a couple hundred people are gonna check it out. And, I'll get one really nice thing about it is I tend to be kind of social media skeptical in a lot of ways, but this particular part of the internet where people are just finding, oh, here's this guy sharing music, like it's just very, very positive. And I'll just get random messages from people being like, hey, my mother sang that song for me when I was going to sleep 75 years ago. And like, thank you for that. That really made my
Mhm.
day. So it's two part. I mean, I do it for me and it's extremely relaxing, but just having a way to share it also is nice. In fact, I had maybe a month ago, it was a busy shift and I came in to apologize to a patient for how long things had taken before I, had the discharge conversation. And her daughter said that they found me online and had been listening to my music for the last 2 hours, and it had really it had made the time pass. And I was like, oh, that's that's fantastic. Thanks for letting me know.
Yeah, that actually speaks to something as physicians and scientists. I'd love to talk with you about music as medicine. That family, without calling it that, was probably using the music because they were calmed down. You did service recovery without even knowing it because your music helped them.
Yeah.
And there's a remarkable amount of data and information in the scientific literature about music and its effects on the mind and on physiology. And I do recall, little simple things like an aunt of mine who became increasingly demented over time, and my cousin telling me that among the few things she remembered was lyrics to songs from the 1940s. She couldn't remember family members, but she would sing 40s songs with the lyrics into her old age. Talk a little bit about what you've learned about the healing and restorative effects of music.
Oh, I mean, yeah, that's I couldn't agree more with that. It's funny that story resonates a lot with me. My grandmother passed a couple years ago when she was 98, and we had a couple days with her at home, and I actually spent several hours the last couple days just playing, singing, and playing guitar and violin. And just as you said, I mean, she was really, there were moments where there wasn't much of her there cognitively, but I would start singing a song from the 20s or 30s, and just immediately she would perk up and sing every single word. Um, it's really, it's pretty amazing. Um, and this is a little bit of a tangent, but just sort of in getting to ways in which being able to share with people in the medical environment. Another fun thing about my getting back into playing more is that an ICU doc in my hospital got wind of the fact that I play music, and she got in touch with me. And so she and I actually have, I think 3 times now, maybe we've just picked a day and we'll go up to the ICU and pick a quiet corner of the unit where there's not a lot going on, and we'll just play violin duets for an hour. Um, And it's really fun. People, there's a lot of, consultants walking by and sort of doing a double take at the fact that the ICU doc and the ER doc are playing the music. But, people like it, and family members will, come from the other corner of the unit and sit and listen for 10 minutes. Yeah, it's really fun.
It does speak to, we didn't really, and we don't, I don't think either of us, we work in different hospitals, and I don't think either of us can propose this, but you know, incorporating music into what is a stressful environment in the emergency department or in the ICU um, seems to make sense. I mean, we all remember our times in the OR and training, music being played while surgery is going on, usually the surgeon's preference, which sometimes was good and sometimes not. But one could argue that application of music in a somewhat deliberate way might actually help the outlook of some patients and families and otherwise.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I'm really, yeah, sort of kicking myself now that I didn't start doing this years ago. We don't really have a schedule, this other doc and I, but she, and there's also an ICU nurse who plays the piano that's played with us once. We're gonna try to keep doing it because it's really, we enjoy it, and it's the patients definitely enjoy it. I don't I don't know if it would work in the ER. It seems a little bit chaotic, and I would feel sort of awkward that if somebody suddenly, was calling for, hey, where's the next available doctor? If I was the closest one, I'd feel a little weird not putting the violin down. But in the ICU, I don't have that problem.
Well, and although he wouldn't necessarily even be playing, but we don't. There's this cacophony of noise and distractions in the emergency department. But even putting music or the option for music in rooms or in the waiting room or something, um, one would have to choose the type of music, but it may well be something that could be done. I mean, there have been discussions of the benefits of having a television in a room for people to be distracted. Ambient music can help in certain situations.
Yeah, well, I don't need any convincing of that, certainly. Yeah.
So as we talked about at the beginning, I found you happily through the Tony Kornheiser show. Tell for people who don't know what the show is or who the people are, how did you end up as one of the performers on that show? It's not a regular thing every day, but
Yeah, no,
your
it's
name is known.
probably it's every couple months probably. Yeah, it was just sort of on a whim. I mean, I live in DC, and I, watched PTI. It's the ESPN show that Tony Kornheiser's on. I watched that in college, so I know who he is. And I came across the podcast, and it's just, it's sort of it's amusing. And if you live locally, there's a lot of just sort of random local stuff. Um, so yeah, as you said, that they to introduce the last segment, they I guess his former producer Gary wrote this silly little song with lyrics, I don't know, 10 years ago. And it's sort of become this funny tradition where people send in their own takes on it, whether it's a marching band or a harmonica or an accordion or a barbershop quartet or whatever. And so one of the fun things about fiddle music, the other thing, actually, one thing I didn't mention in terms of my background is, in addition to playing classical music all the way up through college, I also played in a contradance band for about 10 years,
Hmm,
starting in when I was like 13. It's basically, it's like New England style sort of folk dancing. It's um it's kind of like square dancing, but square dancing is more sort of
right.
country western music, and contra dancing is more New England and jigs and reels, Irish kind of stuff. Anyway, so I have that background. And that kind of music is just so simple. It's just three chords, and all you really need to do is just sort of throw some ornamentations around the melody, and you kind of have your contra dance tune. So, I mean, I didn't have any particular connection, but I sent it in. My hook was basically, I live like, I don't know exactly where Tony lives, but I'm probably half a mile from his house. And,
Right.
um, just sort of I'm an ER doctor. This is how I, decompress between shifts during a, pandemic, that there's a little bit of a human interest angle there, I guess. But, yeah, I emailed, uh, Nigel, his producer, and he just got back to me and says, "Hey, this is great. Well, we'll throw it in the rotation." And so it's sort of become this regular, I don't know, it's probably every couple of months, but they have a rotation of people that they put in that slot.
And he does introduce you by name,
Yeah.
and the running joke is that if you think you can do this, You probably can't, and you really can't do the other job he does. He's an ER doctor.
Yeah,
Uh,
it's a nice ego boost every time it comes up. I think he's being a little generous, but I appreciate it.
so what are you very much seem to enjoy doing this for yourself and doing this for others, whether it's in the ICU or putting it out on the internet where it's easily accessible, and I can certainly recommend it, having listened to a number of your productions. What do you plan to do with your music?
Um, I I think for most part, just continue doing what I'm doing. I'm enjoying it. But I have had actually the last year or two gotten, I started playing in the ICU some. We we we've played for a few hospital functions. But yeah, just trying to do more of it. I started I also grew up like working at a summer camp and uh sort of group singing. So just recently, because as I've played guitar and done more singing the last few years, I've gotten more comfortable with it. So I've started having friends over to our house every couple months and just getting together and sort of doing like a campfire type, just go around. People just pick, what do you want to do? Beatles, Simon and Garfunkel, folk tunes, classic rock, whatever. And I'll just play guitar or piano and, just kind of people sing along. That's really fun just as a social thing. My brother and sister also both play. And so I've been working with them on, I helped my brother record an album of some of his stuff last year. And I'm going to help my sister with some stuff in the next couple of months. I'm gonna, yeah, just try to keep recording stuff, find new ways to. An old friend of mine from college is a orchestra and choral conductor, and last June she got me to play with her. So it's just been really fun to kind of get back into it, because I used to be a fairly serious musician, and then I kind of just let it slide for 15 years or so. So it's been really fun to get back into it.
Well, you have a skill set well, skill set as an emergency physician, which is would be enough, but you have a skill set in music that many of us wish we had and certainly can enjoy from you and from others. And as we explore more music in our own lives and music in patients' lives, I think we're going to continue to learn more about this. How can we follow you? How can we learn more about you? Where can people find you?
Yeah, thanks. So, yeah, well, I'm on, you can just search my name, on Spotify, Apple Music, whatever. So all the recordings I have are on streaming services. I do have a website. I believe it's ianwarringtonmusic.com.
It is. Yes,
I,
it
I,
is.
uh, I need to edit that a little bit in anticipation of you sharing this because it's been a while. But and then I have this Instagram site that Ian Fiddle Music, on Instagram that I don't. I'll miss some days, but I try to put something up just about every day, just because it's a fun way to kind of keep myself, just constantly playing and sharing stuff.
And I can certainly recommend if you're looking for something to listen to after a tough shift or a tough day or whatever it may be, I can certainly recommend going to the Ian Fiddle Music portion of Instagram and ianwarringtonmusic.com and find you in those various places. So thank you for taking the time to speak with us
Sure.
and thank you for all that you do for your patients and now for us in the world of music.
No, thanks. I appreciate having the chance to share. And yeah, it's just, if I can, if there are three people listening, then you know, that's, I'm happy to have the opportunity to share it. And so the larger the audience, the better.
That's great. And at the end of this podcast, you'll get to hear more from Ian's work and go to his website and his Instagram feed and hear more of what he does. So thank you for joining us in this installment of our M-Centric podcast series, The Shift Report. And special thanks to Dr. Ian Warrington for sharing his important insights. For more content, networking, and innovation in the world of emergency medicine, please visit mcentric.org.